We're going to look at how the 4 conversational maxims influence our interactions with other people. These were first articulated by Paul Grice. And this video is mostly going to be educational, but I'll try to create some basic concrete tips for each of the 4 maxims. A maxim is just an unspoken principle or rule of conversation. And when a conversation is going well, or as expected, you'll hardly notice that these are in effect. The conversation will feel natural. But we're not born with these. We learn them and we pick them up through experience. And ideally, both people in a conversation would cooperate in following these principles to communicate effectively. You can usually tell that something's gone a little wrong when somebody in the conversation doesn't follow these norms. If people aren't following these principles, then the conversation can start to feel off, demanding, confusing, dissatisfying, and that increases the work that's required to manage the conversational difficulty and get things back on track if possible. If you struggle day to day with conversations, then use these 4 maxims as a checklist for self-assessment. My hope is that by becoming more aware of how these maxims work, you can become a better conversationalist over time. The first maxim is quantity. Simply put, this means to be informative. But it requires a balance. Being informative means that the communicator should give the right amount or expected amount of information in a conversation, but not too little or not too much. The classic example of too little information is when a teenager asks his mom or dad to borrow the car, but they're not providing enough information for the request.
Can I borrow the car?
Well, where are you going? They answer,
Out.
who are you going out with?
Friends.
Well, when will you be home?
Later.
Those answers don't give very much information. And if this were my son, I'd say he's not fully cooperating or working with me to give me the information or quantity of information I need for the type of request that he's making. Now, does this mean there's anything untruthful about what he has said? No. His plans are to go out with friends and be back later. Those things are all true as far as we know. It's just that there's not sufficient detail for me to feel satisfied with his answers given his request. Sometimes you'll see this in job interviews. An applicant just doesn't have enough to say about an important question, and that may raise some red flags. On the other side of the coin, people will sometimes over-explain. They give too much information for the situation. This happened to me once during a job interview. We had about a dozen questions to ask the applicant and about 30 minutes to do it. And we asked the first question, and the applicant gave us a long-winded 10-minute answer. And it was just a warm-up question, really, about why they were interested in the position. A 10-minute answer was saying too much for what the situation called for. That violated the maxim of quantity because it was too much. And you could feel that in the room, it created a fairly demanding situation for me and the other interviewers because we had to do the rest of the interview in the limited time that remained. So it caused conversational difficulty. If I had to boil this maxim down into a concrete tip, I'd say to read the situation and give the amount of information that would satisfy the expectations. Don't make people pull information out of you, and don't dominate conversations by talking the whole time. Don't say too much or say too little. Give the expected amount of information. The second maxim is quality, and that means speaking truthfully. You'll often hear this explained as not lying or not saying what you know is false. It could also mean not making claims without adequate evidence or stretching the point beyond what the evidence would support. When I was young, I went to high school with somebody who was always making up stories that usually involved famous people that he knew. So I grew up in a really small town, and there's just no way that this kid knew Michael Jackson or hung out with the band members from Guns N' Roses. The tip for this is obvious. Speak truthfully and don't stretch the truth, exaggerate, or make claims you cannot support with evidence. The third maxim is relevance, sometimes called relation. This means that the information that comes out has to be relevant to the current conversation. And like the other maxims, we hardly notice when people are saying things that are relevant. But you'll notice this when people go off on tangents and what they say doesn't clearly connect or relate to the rest of the conversation.
Why do we communicate? To feel good. Isn't that really why we communicate? That's the only reason we communicate. You're always communicating either to create a good feeling or amplify a good feeling. For example, if you're feeling good, why do you always share that? You want to share it because by sharing with other people, it makes you feel even what? Better. If you're feeling really lousy, why do you want to tell somebody how you feel? Because by telling them how you feel, you think it'll get rid of the negative feeling and make you feel what? That's right. Or you communicate because you want them to change something. Why do you want them to change it? Because you think if they change this result, then in the future you'll feel what? Or if you believe that it'll change in the future, you'll feel. So why do you communicate? To feel what? That's it. Now take a look at your list, see if it's true. To be healthy, does that make you feel better? To have peace, does that make you feel better? To not be a monk. Does that make you feel better? Well, unless you're a monk, you kind of like being a monk. But for this person, that would make them feel better. How many would agree? Okay. How about to support? Why do you want to support? Because it makes you feel what? Better. When it makes you feel good. To get attention. Why? Because you think if you get attention, you'll feel what? Better. To survive. That usually makes you feel better when you survive versus when you don't. To teach. Why do people want to teach? Because it makes them feel what? Good, better. To build a relationship. Why do you want to build a relationship? Because it makes you feel what? Better, good, or better? Either one. Well, it depends on the person. To be creative. Why do people want to be creative? Because it makes them feel good. Is there anything on this list that doesn't meet this distinction? Why do we create distinctions? Because we think by doing that, what we can do is do better in the future, which will make us feel better. To get a paycheck. Why do you want a paycheck? To look good. You want to look good because you think that'll make you feel better. Isn't that true? We don't always communicate that when we're communicating. Meaning, we have an upset, we have a challenge, and instead of saying, I want to get out of this lousy feeling, I want to feel better, we say, you screwed up. I want you to stop that. Does that make you feel better? Sometimes for a little bit in the moment, but as a long term. You know what else? Sometimes we make ourselves feel better in the moment, but we do it in a way that makes us feel bad in the long term. Either we feel bad about ourselves, or it makes them treat us in a way that we'll probably feel bad later on. How many would agree? So here's our goal in communicating from now on. To feel better, make sure the people who are around feel better, and to produce the result. So in the future we feel better. Does that make sense? We don't want to just go around expressing our emotion. We don't want to say, well, I don't want to suppress, so I'm just going to unload on you. Because I have a language pattern I learned in fortune management I could use. We're not going to endorse you unloading on anybody ever again. What you're going to do is, before you talk to anybody else, if you're upset, you're going to find out, what do I really need to feel better? Would that be a useful thing to know before you started talking to somebody? Because if you know what you need to feel better, then you can ask for it in a way that's elegant.
And communication really is an art form. It's like a song and dance. Communication kind of reminds me of painting a painting. Let's say your original idea was to make a left stroke with the color orange. But in the middle of the process, you decide that a right stroke with the color yellow is more appropriate. It's about being in the zone and adjusting as necessary. So why should we even care about effective communication? Well, we should care about effective communication because these are some of the results of ineffective communication. Number one on the list is wasted time. We waste so much time due to ineffective communication, and I highly doubt anyone here wants to waste their time on purpose. Secondly, we also waste emotions. Because see, along with wasted time, conversations drag on much longer than they need to. And with that, our emotions drag on much longer than they need to. See, ineffective communication also leads to misunderstandings. And misunderstandings could lead to the eventual loss of relationships. Has anyone ever lost a relationship due to a misunderstanding? So you see the need for effective communication. Now, I'm not here to proselytize, but outside of this forum, I share my Christian faith a lot. And over the years in doing so, I've literally had thousands of conversations with thousands of different people. And these people are from every background and walk of life you can imagine. And you know what I've learned from that experience? No two conversations are ever the same. And that's because no two people are ever the same. Now, there may be similarities, but you will never find a carbon copy conversation. So you have to learn how to navigate through questions and rebuttals. You may need to explain an idea in a different way if your audience didn't receive it the first time. See, your job as a communicator is to deliver a message and make sure that message is received and understood by your audience. Point blank, that's it. Anything that stops or hinders your audience from receiving that information, it needs to be removed from your speech. And this includes removing things like extra words, extra stories, and and even extra emotions. See, one of the biggest hindrances to effective communication is talking for way longer than we need to. And this is not only because we're dealing with people's short attention spans, but when you talk longer than necessary, you become an emotional burden. Have you ever felt drained after having a conversation with someone? See, problems arise when communication and conversations become more about the person wanting to be heard than actually delivering information. Now, there's a mathematical phrase that says the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Now, this can refer to direct communication, because after all, a straight line gets straight to the point. See, when you speak, you need to understand that simplicity is key. Albert Einstein once said that if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.